Well, hey, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of the LTD Leadership Lean In, where our goal is to help you lead like never before in your hotels and in your homes. My name is Sam.
And I'm Lawanda.
Okay, and we're jumping back into, so a couple of episodes ago, Lawanda, Richard and I introduced our new sort of book that we've been studying. And this book is called What Drives Winning Environments. And what's unique about this book is it's actually written more towards coaches of athletic teams, whether they're professional, collegiate, youth. And the conversation is really, it's very much driven from their perspective as coaches, but I believe that there's a ton of opportunity to learn from different disciplines in leadership. And I think coaches in particular have the skill set to galvanize a team and to lead people to unique challenges. And so I think we have a lot to learn from them. And today we're going to learn about the concept of defining expectations.
Looking forward to it. And it's my favorite time of year. It's football season. So
there you go, right? I didn't even make that connection, but yes. So of course that's why we did that. It all makes sense. We'll just go ahead and get started. So really a lot of leaders, I believe, and what we're learning from the book, they underdefine they underdefine things. When I say that, meaning they don't define or clarify expectations. And that oftentimes can lead to over managing. And in today's episode, like we were talking about, we're going to go back to this book, What Drives Winning Environments, and we're really going to focus on defining expectations.
That's right, Sam. According to the book, when an NBA GM was asked, what is your role inside of the organization? This is what he had to say. He said, my job is to build an environment where people can do their best work. And if we're going to challenge you all, Sam, what's the most important thing you do as a leader?
Just like he said, the most important thing that we do as a leader is to provide an environment where people can do their best work. And in the book, they explain that they go on to explain that when they ask the best, the most successful coaches and leaders what drives winning environments, it always comes back to the same three things. And those three things are: how do you define, how do you manage, and how do you model expectations?
And so today we want to help stimulate thought around how you can define your expectations and build systems and processes where anything that you expect is clearly defined.
Great. So my sister Lawanda is an elementary school teacher. And I think it's kind of funny because she actually really connected with this quote. And this quote is, if you don't teach them the right way to do things, it's hard for them to do the right things, right? And right. I really think that that's because a player, just like a student or an associate within the hotel, they can't overcome bad coaching or bad leadership. And so if you don't teach them, if we don't teach our team members our way or our expectation for doing things, then it's hard for them to do it, right? And so just like it's important for coaches to give players a good plan, it's also just as critical for us as leaders to give a good level of instruction and an opportunity to be able to go and perform and execute on their job.
Right. So if you take the time to teach them that, then you have a chance for that to happen. And if you don't teach them, then the chances of somebody getting it right on their own and totally figuring it out without much help, it puts a lot of pressure on the player and our team members, if you want, to put it in our context here at the hotel.
Yeah. So again, just like a coach, a leader. So we've talked about this, we believe that everybody is a leader, right? So just like a coach, a leader has to do their job in teaching the information and the concepts in the way that we know team members can comprehend and execute them.
And Sam, I love the fact that the elementary school teachers, like her sister, made that connection and that concept resonates with them. Because I know when Bill Belichick is talking there, he's not thinking of elementary school teachers. He's talking about his coaches competing at the highest level. And what a cool connection that is, really all at the same time.
Yeah. So we'll take a look at this. So these are the things that they're covering, right? Before they can even touch any sort of curriculum. So these are the things that that they're learning in kindergarten, right? So really, really basic skills, and they're making this connection, right, to if we expect people to learn these to teach these things in kindergarten and at a very foundational level, then we need to have similar ways of teaching foundational concepts or expectations in the workplace or in a team. And so I really make that connection when I see this sort of what I learned in kindergarten, and then I make that connection to the quote from Bill Belichick. It really makes so much sense why it's so important to teach those foundational expectations.
Yeah, and I mean, he knows what a good teacher looks like. And it comes back to us being crystal clear with all the things that are going to come our way and what we have to cover really before we get going and what we want to teach.
Right. So there's this really great line in the book, and I kind of want to put it on a quote board or something, but the quote is, productivity matches the clarity of direction. So our productivity within the hotel or on any team, it directly matches the clarity of expectations. And it really helps to drive that direction, helps drive productivity.
Well, yeah, I think it always comes back to us as leaders, as teachers, that when it's time, whether it's game day or time to execute something as simple as a check-in process, it's really us measuring ourselves. So how do we get the information across?
Right. And I think personally, it took me quite a long time to come to this concept or to really understand this. And I would say, early days in my leadership journey, I always thought, wow, like this individual, they're not doing very well, or, oh, wow, this person is really, really on it. But really, truly, it's we, right? It's not they. It's, well, we are on it, or we are having that challenge, because it's a partnership. And we have a duty to whomever on that team to make sure that we've really clarified those expectations, and that, we, or I have, as a leader, that I've done my part in making sure that we're equipping them to be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's really the common thought.
Yeah. So I think if we went back to, so in the previous episode, we played a video of this Pop Warner team. Okay. So I'll give you a little context. So what happens is the Pop Warner team, they're supposed to be running out onto the field, and everybody knows this concept, right? They break through, the cheerleaders are holding the sign, and the kids break through the sign, and everybody cheers, and it's exciting. Well, in the video, what happens is the kids didn't know that they didn't understand that's what they were supposed to do. So they ran in all different directions. They ran into each other, into coaches, ran over the cheerleaders. And you can see here, right? If you remember, you'll, the chaos of the boys running through the banner. But really, I think what we want to spotlight here is the coach for this section, in this section, because, I'm sure that he's thinking, you guys, like, how can you mess this up? Like, how can you not know how to do this? But really, yeah, you got to think about, like, did he ever teach them? I don't know.
Right. And that was just like, and so that's really the common thought, like, that part of people just assuming people just know.
Yep, absolutely. And so it's so easy, I think, to defer the accountability to them, to the team, and not look at ourselves in the mirror. When things like that happen, it's clear that perhaps we've made an assumption that we have taught a skill or we've gone over something. But when something like that occurs, I think it's really, really critical that we do reflect. And it really is, if you think about it, if he takes some time to digest what happened, right? The coach, if he takes some time to digest what happened, he may reflect on that and say, well, technically, I didn't actually cover how to run through a sign correctly if my team captain, falls down in the process of getting there, and, no one else knows what to do. Ooh, bless you, bless you.
Yeah, thank you. And so you just got to cover it all, no doubt.
Yeah. And I think that's why PJ Fleck, we actually spoke quite a bit about him in that previous episode, but that's what, he's a football coach at the University of Minnesota. And he loves this quote, if you're an inch off of landing, no big deal. But if you're an inch off takeoff, you miss the moon by a million miles. So, and PJ Fleck has what he calls How University. And I think we can learn a lot from him. And really the concept behind How University is where anything that is expected is defined. So anything that's expected when you join his football program, he's going to define for you in How. And I think that that's a fantastic concept, and perhaps something that we could really take from their way of galvanizing a team and defining expectations and sort of developing a How University for our associates.
And I was gonna say, yeah, because that is definitely one of the key points in the book that revolves around that, building a firm foundation. And so in the book, we learn about Tim Corbin, the head baseball coach at Vanderbilt, and they talk about his first meeting of the year with his team. Coach Corbin goes on to say it's an hour and a half, and he doesn't speak to baseball not one time.
Right. Yeah. He doesn't, they talk about that in the book, right? So he doesn't, in that first meeting that he has with his team to start the year, he doesn't even address baseball once. And that kind of makes me think, right, about that kindergarten list, because, in that list, they weren't talking about, learning your ABCs. It was about the foundational expectations of being within a classroom or being on a team. And in fact, so what he does is, he shows him this image, and I want you to look at that first image on the screen. And he says, today we're going to lay a foundation, and by the end of the year, this is what it's going to look like. And so he's really clear about, hey, we got to start with these foundational concepts if we ever want to be able to build something, right? Like the Shard, which is 95 stories. And, as leaders, I think in our hotels, every time we're, in our version of the classroom, right? Which is what, a daily huddle, maybe, departmental meetings, coaching moments on the floor. Right. So just like these coaches, each and every day, it's our duty as leaders to build on that foundation, just like they've taught us to do as a coach.
And I think we all want to get to the picture on the right so fast. You know what I'm saying? It's like we want to hurry up and be done, but really you just can't do it. And in fact, you're not going to be able to do that unless you spend so much time on this foundation. Like that's the beginning blocks of everything.
Yeah. You can't have a strong, a house or a program or a team that can withstand, turmoil or, any sort of disruption, which we know happens pretty regularly, right? You can't expect to have those things if you don't have that firm foundation of this is who we are and this is what we do. And if productivity, like we said, if productivity matches the clarity of direction, then, I'd love to show you here on the next slide just how clear his Tim Corbin's communication is with his team. So in the book, they discuss how he teaches his guys how to clean the facility for Christmas break. And he goes on, and really this is how he communicates. He said, this is what it looks like now. So I'm going to show you. This is what it looks like now. And this is what it should look like after. He's very clear, right? So this is what the dugout looks like now. This is what it should look like after. This is what the pin looks like now. My expectation is this is what it looks like after. And, so some people might just look at this as, he's just teaching them how to clean. But the way I see it is, he's really closing the gap of interpretation. He's leaving nothing to interpretation. Everything is very clear about what does success look like and what is his expectation for fall cleaning day.
And that's what it's all about, offering clarity. He explains it, he shows them the pictures, he makes it crystal clear what his expectations are. And in fact, I feel like I could go to Vanderbilt and be a part of this team because I know what success looks like within their organization.
Yeah, and I really love the mentality that he's trying to create. And I think it's a really awesome way to get his point across. And he's always working hard to get his point across. And that becomes very, very clear throughout the book. And they go on really to document, how he responded as a leader after a bad day of practice. So we all have bad days. We have bad days in the hotel. We have challenging things, but this is how he went on to respond after a bad day of practice. So he in a meeting, sort of a post-mortem meeting right after the practice, this is how he reminded them of their culture. He showed them this picture on the screen and he said, "What do you all see when you look at this?" And the team went on to, he had them raise their hands, and, some of the verbs or the words, I'm sorry, that they mentioned, right, are, they said head down, right? So they're a bunch of sheep walking, their heads are down, and they're all just going off in their own direction. And I think, we've all had days where our team has performed like that, right? Where their heads are down, they're not working as a unit, and they're just sort of sheep wandering off independently. And he talks to them and he says, well, that is who you were yesterday. And then he goes on to show them this picture. And he says, this is, he shows them this picture and he asks them what they saw. And, I'm curious, LaWanda, like, what do you see, right, when you see this beautiful picture of these lions?
So what I see, Sam, is I see a cohesive team. They focused, heads up, in line, and ready. So what he's trying to do is, again, very similar to what Gonzaga was doing, is give them imagery that delineates what it looks like when they're in character and what it looks like when they're out of character.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty darn clear. This is, the image of the lions, that's who we are. That's who we are as a team. That's the expectation. And when we're out of character, we kind of resemble a bunch of sheep wandering around in a field. So I don't think you could be more clear in how he's delineating sort of what it means to be one of them.
Absolutely.
And, like I said, the book is riddled with incredible coaches, and I'm sure most of you know or have heard of Coach K at Duke University. And so, actually, many people may or may not realize, right, that Coach K was also coached the Team USA Olympics team. And when he took over that team, it was actually right after the worst finish in USA basketball history. And when the authors went on to ask Coach K, hey, what was the most important team building exercise that you did? What was the most important thing that you did with that crew? He went on to explain that the most important exercise he did was actually the day before they ever started any sort of practice. They met the day before, and again, this is a theme we're hearing. They never once talked about basketball. What they talked about were standards. And guys like Kobe Bryant, Jason Kidd, LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, right? These are some big time players. And you could imagine that to try and coach a team with that level of talent, and I don't want to assume, but there's probably some ego there, right? To be able to coach a team like that, you've got to really have a good handle on things. And what they did, or what he had them do, was all sit down together And they came up with these standards, and they called them the Team USA standards for who we are. And they, things like, don't be late, be flexible, always tell the truth, no excuses, look each other in the eye, have each other's back. These are the things, right, that they all determined were going to be the keys, the key standards for success, and for helping them define who they were as teammates and who they were together. So this was how they were going to live together and work together.
And so two things, Sam, I want to point out here. First, one is if you look at that list and compare it to the kindergarten classroom list, it's very, very similar. And the second thing is he's involved them with the process of creating standards. And it's all about the standards. To be a part of creating standards, it creates ownership. And when you create ownership, that also creates accountability.
Yeah. I love that he didn't necessarily just say, hey, these are my standards and you're going to adhere to them. It was much more of a collaborative opportunity for all of them to, to chime in and say, hey, these are going to be our standards. And I think, that certainly helps, with a buy-in, to make sure that everyone's willing, to adhere to those standards. And so, one of the things that Coach K talks a little bit about in the book, right, is, there can be no chemistry without accountability. No chemistry on a team without accountability, not only to obviously your coach or your leader, so same within the hotel, but also accountability to one another as teammates. And if you're going to, contrast the difference between standards and rules, they would say standards is us living at our best. And I think, when I think about rules, it's kind of living at the other end of that spectrum. And it might have more of a negative orientation where, and the other, thing, it can just be more of a negative thing. So, when we really thinking about the difference between standards and rules, standards is us living up to expectations, rising to the occasion, living at our best, where rules are kind of more of a negative orientation. And, I'm not saying necessarily, right, that we don't need any rules. I don't, I'm not saying that, because we obviously know that we do need them. But I also think that rules can sort of back us into a bit of a corner. Whereas standards, they help give us a little bit more latitude on how we're going to manage people.
Right. And I don't think anyone wants to manage just in the black and white area.
Right.
And so those standards do give us flexibility to treat each event and occasion in person with more compassion.
Yeah. And I think, that speaks to, again, the brilliance of Coach K's approach with this team, and reestablishing their culture as Team USA. And, I'm sure if you were going to ask Coach K, what's his primary responsibility as a coach, he would say, your primary responsibility as a coach, your primary responsibility as a leader is to become one with the player, to become one with the associate, and then become one with the team.
Right. And then once you do that, as leaders in the hotel, it's the exact same. And that's what you should be spending most of your time on. I mean, that statement is so powerful, because I think there's a tendency for us leaders to think you need to become one with me in this program. And he said the exact opposite. As a leader, my role is to become one with them, to get with them so I can influence them on how things should go, and then become part of this team. So we're all moving in one direction, in the same direction.
Yeah. And, I think essentially, right, defining and clarifying these standards is creating a unique team identity, right? And, so here are some characteristics. They outline these characteristics actually in the book. And they're saying, these are some of the primary characteristics that winning teams have. And if you look at that glossary, the goal becomes, okay, how do we bring these words to life and make them part of who we are? So how do you take some of these performance skills, or relational skills, and develop standards. On the sales team, we call them imperatives, but how do we create, some of these standards for defining, who we are and how we behave and how we make decisions?
And there was a great lesson in the book from Missy Lombardi. She, who is the softball coach at Oregon, she came from a national championship program in Oklahoma. And when she went to Oregon, her way of doing something was completely different than the person who was there before her. And which is, somewhat what happens in our hotels, right? We had a GM or AGM that's transitioned to go to task force, and then we have somebody different. And so when she set up was what they called the Duck ID, and they defined who they were as a group. And it went from, I don't know if we're going to have a season because so many people transferred or quit. In 2 years, they were top 10. You had to deal with the leadership transition when you became the VP of sales, right?
I did. Yeah. So, I've experienced these similar transitions. And I believe strongly that, there are a lot of different ways to be successful. Each one of us has unique leadership styles, approaches to doing things. It doesn't mean that any one way is right or wrong. They're just different. And that's why it's so important that, our job as a leader is to ensure that everyone is on the same page, because like I said, there can be a lot of different ways to interpret the same words. And it's our job to make sure that we are clarifying, our expectations and really making sure that we're creating an environment, right, where they may have done something in one way historically, and we have to make sure that they understand, okay, the expectation is this now, and these are the standards that we're going to uphold moving forward. And so, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah. So, again, I was like, where do you start when it comes to defining, because that's a big thing to tackle as a leader, especially coming into a new environment, but maybe even just sort of trying to reinvigorate or sort of renew a culture, right, that you've been in. And I think maybe the first thing would be to think about, what is your curriculum at How You, right? So what is your, what are the key things that you decided that you need to be able to teach, that are critical. And I think a great question to sit back and reflect as a leader on, is, and, anything that is expected should be defined. So what do I expect? Really sit back and say, like, what do I expect? And have I really done what I need to do to clearly define what I expect, and how to actually execute on what I expect?
Right. And I think one thing they talked about in the book is that the the coach, what they did with the basketball team in the book is the author, he sat behind the team's bench and watched one game. And then he wrote down all the different things that weren't functioning at the standard that they wanted to achieve just within that one game. He then showed that list to the coach the next day, and his response was, "We can't even break a press."
Yeah. And when I look at that list, right, and I'm no basketball expert, but I feel like I'm getting more in tune with sports just reading from the book.
I know, me too.
But when I look at the list, it really, again, it doesn't have anything to do with basketball X's and O's, right? It's not play calling, it's nothing related to that, but it does have everything to do with winning and everything to do with success. And that's really how I interpret that, that list that author presented to the coach right there. And I think, truthfully, we have an opportunity to replicate this exact concept in our hotels and within our individual departments. And of course, we want to always get right to the good stuff, right? We want to jump right in to the specifics of, how to make a bed or whatever, how to check somebody in. We want to get to that technical stuff, but truthfully, realistically, we're never going to get to the good stuff if we don't cover the important stuff. And these are some of the things that we've got to really figure out. What are we expecting of people? and are we defining that as important, and are we clarifying that that is an expectation? And I think, this is interesting because, they showed the coach this list, and he said, and then they asked the coach specifically, how have you formally taught what this looks like? How have you formally taught on any of these concepts? And, they actually said in the book that the coach basically like turned ghost white and didn't know how to answer that question, because he is realizing, oh my goodness, we jumped right into the meat of things, but we never established that firm foundation that we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah. And then, like you said, it just goes back to the importance of the foundation. I think there's just a tendency to cover things one time and think that they got it. And it's not really that important. And then you can't build that big, beautiful building that way. You can't become who you want to be unless there's a firm foundation. Really, I'm just noticing that there's this reiteration of a firm foundation for anything in the hotels, whether you're cleaning, whether you're in the kitchen, whether you're at the front desk, you're a greeter, a houseman. You have to have that foundation, the basics, and that foundation is completely covered in detail over and over again.
Yeah, I've heard people refer to the leadership role and the role of a leader as the chief repeating officer. Right? The CRO.
Yeah.
You're a chief encouragement officer. You're a lot of things. You wear a lot of hats as a leader, but repeating yourself is one of them. And just when you get sick of hearing the same thing, it's probably time to say it again, right? And I think that took me quite a long time to figure out. And it also took me a little bit of time to get comfortable with doing that, because it felt like I was repeating myself. And I'm thinking, are people getting sick of this message? But they aren't. And there is absolutely this concept of, culture drifts, culture, like leaking of culture, culture drifting. And it's really our job as leaders to make sure that people are staying focused and on track. Yeah. And you have to do that by, constantly repeating yourself. And there's really an investment, right, of, building this foundation, but realistically, that will accelerate that process of building. And so, when I would ask myself, why weren't we executing, let's just say, I lead the sales team, right? So, if I'm asking myself, why is it that we're not executing on client communication appropriately, or why are we issuing incorrect contracts, or why, is our goal achievement not consistent? I really have to take a step back, and I have to tell myself, I have to say to myself, right, it's because how you hasn't been taught well enough, right? My how you university, right? It just hasn't been taught well enough. Those are critical errors that are being made because I haven't done my job as a leader in defining those expectations. And I think, there's a lot of assumptions that are made. I think unfortunately, oftentimes the higher you rise in leadership, the higher, you may go, the more assumptions start to get made. And we have to really make sure that we're checking ourselves and holding ourselves accountable. And this is why I think so many great leaders could probably learn from that kindergarten classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm laughing because, they always say that that's the formidable years. Everything you need to know in life starts at kindergarten. And I think that's still true. And I can go back to that with Coach K teaching basic standards and foundations at the highest level. That list could have looked like a list of standards for a second grade team. And that, my friends, is really the fundamentals of success. The principles are all the same, regardless of level, regardless of team, regardless of hotels, regardless of life. They really are the same.
Yeah. I mean, it's wild to think that that list of standards that they came up was an equivalent list to like we showed that kindergarten list. So, I mean, obviously, you have the best players in the whole world who are still having to remind ourselves, right, about those standards. And so maybe, from a practical application standpoint for this lesson, right, maybe a quick exercise, again, that you all think about is you ask yourself, what's one thing that we need, right, to do to better define these standards for our team? What is, what is something that we can do, or, that we need to do to better define our expectations or our standards for our team. And, once you have that in mind, then you have to ask yourself, really, how do I teach that in a creative way? Not just, hey, I put out a memo, and this is what we expect, right? I think we have to take it upon ourselves to find ways to creatively teach, and inform and remind people, right, of those expectations. And they talk a lot about that. The good leaders, the best leaders, the most excellent leaders and coaches, they're basically what like a master teacher looks like. And that question, really and truly, if you're a leader, you should be asking yourself, am I inspiring learning?
Absolutely.
Do I inspire them to want to learn, how we do things here? So.
And I was nodding my head because it's like, am I inspiring them to learn? And I just think one of the things that has been settling with me is you have to trust and inspire. And I think so when we talk about that just kind of leads us to this last point. How do you measure understanding? So if you can trust and inspire them to learn, how then do you measure that understanding? And one of the things referenced in the book by a coach was he actually gave his leadership team a formal quiz. Can you imagine that? This says this is a formal way to do it, but it wasn't necessarily to test them. It was actually to test the leaders.
Yeah, I think I thought that was super interesting, when he delivered this sort of quiz or test around their culture and expectations and the things that, the leader had been working hard to convey or teach, right? He wanted to know, am I successfully articulating my message? Is my message resonating with my team? And I thought that was a really interesting way of sort of like measuring understanding. And obviously that's a super formal way. So, we're not going to like necessarily give our associates a quiz, but maybe you do fun trivia at a huddle, or stand up, and they earn a ticket for prizes or candy or breakfast or gift cards or whatever that might be. There are ways to measure understanding in a more formalized way. And there's also obviously ways to measure understanding just by viewing results and, those types of things. So, the coach notes in the book, right, that he'd had this team for a long, long time. And so, he assumed when he gave them that quiz that they would all sort of pass with flying colors. And they didn't necessarily, right? So he had to really take a step back and reevaluate, right, if his message was resonating. And I think the question is, teachers give students tests to see if they're on the same page, but we do it, with the people, but do you also test those people surrounding you? And we have to remember that practice is really not evaluating your team members. It's really evaluating your, effectiveness as a leader. And, it's important to be able to measure the impact that you're having and hold yourself accountable to measure the understanding of the message that you're trying to get across.
Absolutely. And you may be shocked that, when you get the test back, because we assume because it's our world that everybody gets it. And it can really be an eye-opening way when you're trying to measure understanding.
Yeah, but I think like really the ultimate feedback, like we said, is you just got to pay attention. You got to pay attention. And because truthfully, where there's dysfunction, it's probably a pretty clear indication. It's giving us that feedback, that it needs to be taught a bit better. So, and that really could be something that you want to think about, where there's areas of opportunity within your hotel or the leadership team where there's some dysfunction. Maybe you need to reflect to say, are we clearly defining expectations? Is my, do I think that I am, but have I measured the understanding? I can't make that assumption, so I think that there's a ton of, opportunity there, right, where you're just looking for cues or indications across the, the performance of your team to really understand, if if for you to understand if they're understanding, the message that you're really trying to articulate.
Gotcha. And I know we've given you guys a ton of information, especially as a leader. And I don't know about you, what you say, we become repeat coaches or coaching
Yeah,
repeaters.
chief repeating officers.
Chief officers are repeating.
Yeah.
So I think that just about covers it. The first of 3 ways. Now, mind you, that's only one. First of 3 ways to drive a winning environment.
Yeah. And so remember, the goal here, our goal throughout all of these messages that we're going to go through as we continue on this track of learning what drives winning environments is, as to get you as leaders to consider how can you build an environment where people can do their best work. That is your job as a leader, to create an environment where people can actually perform. That's what they want to do. People come to work because they want to perform. They want to be successful. They want to, to learn. So what can we do, right, to create an environment where they, they can actually rise to that, and when things get off track and when they don't go as planned, and we know that that's a common thing, right, that's going to happen. We really want to, again, continue to help you identify and develop these sort of counter moves where you can discover through self-auditing, these 3 questions. And we referred to these 3 questions in the very, very, beginning in the first episode, where we were sort of introducing the book and introducing the concept. And those 3 questions are: have I defined it well? Have I managed it well? And have I modeled it well?
Exactly. And so today we explore why it was so critical to define expectations and considered some best practices for taking a proactive approach.
Yeah. So our next lean in, we're actually going to start highlighting the concept of managing. So today we talked about, how do we define expectations? How do we define standards and sort of create that that identity? And the next episode, LaWanda, we're going to talk about now that you've defined those, now how do you manage to those expectations? How do you manage above the line and below the line behaviors? After you've clarified expectations, you've measured your understanding, that their understanding of it, and now it's time to really start holding, accountability and how to manage to those standards and to those expectations. And I'll speak for both of us when I say that we can't wait to continue on this journey of learning and to learn and to grow alongside of you. So, about to wrap it up.
That's my favorite time. It's my favorite time of the program.
We're gonna get it perfectly in sync. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So let's lean in
and get better
together.